It's nefarious, man. Like, the brain works in fucked up ways.
The mind is one of the most deceiving, manipulative pieces of equipment, flesh, human bodies on earth. I never have trusted my brain.
All of that weight lives in your head, and you are the decision maker.
Psychology of entrepreneurship.
Hi, it's Ronsley. If this is your first volume, welcome. This is a weekly series where I go inside the mind of an entrepreneur, artist, athlete, academic to decipher what is the psychology of our decisions. I'm Australian, and I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians throughout Australia and recognize their continuing connection to land, waters, and community. I pay my respects to them and their cultures and to elders past, present, and emerging of the land I am standing on today. I extend my respect to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who listen to this. This volume is part 3 of a mini-series that made us look at systemic race inaccuracies, stereotyping, and the bias that is clearly all around us. In volume 37, we spoke with
Mark Yettica-Paulson, that's who I am, and I am a facilitator, particularly around Indigenous leadership, or what's called intercultural leadership, where you try to bring groups together. That's my main thing that I do.
And this is a continuation of that conversation. And again, in volume 39, we also did a whole volume on what it really means to be limited by racism. I have to admit that my narrative abilities were kind of lacking in that volume, but we just had to publish it despite me re-recording the whole narrative. So if you haven't listened to volume 37 and 39, then I suggest you listen to those straight after this one. When I was talking with Mark, I was telling him what is almost a common scene every time I enter an Uber or taxi. The driver, where are you from? Me, Australia. Deafening silence. The driver interrupts the silence and says, where were you born? Me, Bahrain, in the Middle East. Silence again. Driver, where do you live? Brisbane, Australia. Silence. Finally, the driver, what about your parents? Me, my mom has a Portuguese passport and my dad has an Indian passport. Driver, oh, you're Indian. I knew it. This happens all the time and it's really, really annoying. But can you imagine if it happened to you when you belonged to this land, going back thousands of generations? And then I found this clip done by the University of Sydney.
When was the last time you encountered casual racism?
Every bloody Uber. Where you from? You know, and I'm just like, I'm Aboriginal. And they're like, but you don't look Aboriginal. And then I'm straight up like, we didn't look racist till you said that. And they're like, okay, sorry, I'm just gonna drive.
And then Mark said this.
It's exactly the same little skit, little vignette. It's like, where are you from? Where are you from? This, I'm that, I'm this. And it's not until the confession of one of my 8 great-grandparents is from Vanuatu. That's what it is. That's what it is. And it's just like, man, is everyone like a I don't know, an anthropological genealogy specialist, and they're all, you know, making their own determinations around ethnicity based on, and they're searching for this, you know, give me the thing that I'm missing. So, so I've seen this play out, right? I've also seen this play out between many years ago, Asian friend of mine, Chinese heritage, and the white fellow student who was just, he walked straight into this because he's like, he did the same thing. Where are you from? I'm Australian. And where were you born? Oh, here in Australia. Oh, what about your parents? Oh, no, they're Australian. And this went on, like on and on, because her great-grandparents came over, even I think one more great, came over in the gold rush. So she's like, look, my family has been here since like 1830. Like, it's like we've been here a very, very long time, all Australian, and you could just see this. They find it difficult to compute. So my antidote to that is to encourage all Australians to carry around the story of their own 8 great grandparents, and just say, look, okay, before we get into this, I say, oh man, where you from? Okay, before we get into this, do you know the story of your 8 great grandparents? Because in order for me to give you your aha moment, I'm going to have to break it down to you where my great grandparents are from. And then you see they go, okay, I'll come back to you next week. I'm going to go do some research. Because I could legitimately say I'm from Scotland because I have Scottish blood. One of my great grandparents is Scottish. All the rest are Aboriginal, and there's one grandparent. I'm like, I actually don't know where he's from. Some kind of island somewhere, but the rest is all Aboriginal, right? But people don't want to see that. They want to see the part that makes it okay for them to carry their mental image, their perception. Oh, that's what it is. Oh, now I feel comfortable. And then I turn around to them and say, well, where are you from? Oh, Melbourne. So what, man? I told you a story for like half an hour, and then you just give me one word answer. That's not fair.
For context, I wanted you to know what challenges First Nation Australians face from the beginning of this volume. And if you really wanted to know how to show up, I didn't want to keep this bit to the end. So, Mark, what are the challenges we face?
I was really drawn to even the way that you position the work that you do as being a way to amplify. That's a fantastic role in the world. It's one of the ways that, to be able to broadcast that kind of, to help messages get out. I think our challenges that face us are the mirror side or the shadow side to the opportunities that face us. We, like you said, the way we grow up impacts the way we comprehend truth and the way we cognitively work through the environment around us and then declare our way of being in the world. And that is shifting. And in 2020, that is shifting in major ways beyond all of us. I think that we've got to amplify the way of saying we need to break free from the negativity of the stereotypes. We have to break free from the stuff that we have been holding on to that said this is why we cannot be with those people, because they are on the other side and they don't like us and we don't like them. If we're going to keep going as a humanity, as peoples, we have to find solutions to things that are much bigger than any of us. Climate, global economy, the way we can deal with food security, and the way we deal with each other religiously, culturally as well. If we can't do those challenges, if we can't see them as opportunities to reframe the way we are, then we're going to end up for a very painful time the next couple of years, because we're not working together, we're not loving each other, we're not seeking out solutions together, we're figuring out how to fight for the whatever's left on the shelves in the supermarkets. And that shouldn't be the way it is. So I think the way that we can continue to work and support each other, I think, is to maintain conversations. And even if you like, being able to say, let's just peel this back and focus on one or two things. And let's really deepen that conversation, make it a little bit more eclectic, different viewpoints, but let's amplify the fact that reasonable, genuine people can sit in a dialogue from various viewpoints and actually start to wrestle with our opportunity / challenge that faces us and have a future focus to where we could grow as a country rather than how we may reach the edge of who we are.
The 13th of February is a very special day. I married my wife on that day, but also in 2008, the Parliament of Australia under the then Prime Minister said this to the country.
Today we honour the Indigenous peoples of this land, the oldest continuing cultures in human history. We reflect on their past mistreatment. We reflect in particular on the mistreatment of those who were stolen generations, this blemished chapter in our national history. The time has now come for the nation to turn a new page in Australia's history by righting the wrongs of the past and so moving forward with confidence to the future. We apologise for the laws and policies of successive parliaments and governments that have inflicted profound grief, suffering and loss on these our fellow Australians. We apologise especially for the removal of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children from their families, their communities and their country. For the pain, suffering and hurt of these stolen generations, their descendants and for their families left behind, we say sorry. To the mothers and the fathers, the brothers and the sisters, for the breaking up of families and communities, we say sorry. And for the indignity and degradation thus inflicted on a proud people and a proud culture, we say sorry. We, the Parliament of Australia, respectfully request that this apology be received in the spirit in which it is offered, as part of the healing of the nation. For the future, we take heart, resolving that this new page in the history of our great continent can now be written. We today take this first step by acknowledging the past and laying claim to a future that embraces all Australians. A future where this Parliament resolves that the injustices of the past must never, never happen again. A future where we harness the determination of all Australians, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, to close the gap that lies between us and life expectancy, educational achievement and economic opportunity. A future where we embrace the possibility of new solutions to enduring problems where old approaches have failed. A future based on mutual respect, mutual resolve and mutual responsibility. A future where all Australians, whatever their origins, are truly equal partners with equal opportunities and with an equal stake in shaping the next chapter in the history of this great country, Australia.
Between 1 in 3 and 1 in 10 Indigenous children were forcibly removed from their families and communities between 1910 and 1970. Placed into white homes or institutions, these children were taught to reject their Indigenous heritage and were forced to adopt white culture. The aftermath of this devastating process has seen many of the Indigenous people and families involved experience high rates of depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress, and suicide, along with poor health and socio-economic outcomes. Many First Nations people are still searching for their parents and siblings. To learn more about the stolen generation, there will be links in the show notes.
You know, I've seen this a lot. The flashy quotes that I see up on walls in offices here, for example, quote, "It takes a village," is a common quote I see a lot. It's the idea that we are all a team and we got to do this all together. But that has been part of culture from the very beginning. Why is it that we seem to come across something like this and think it is so profound when it has been part of human interactions for generations?
But how about this for a story for you? Sitting with my father watching a news report, and there's an announcement that they, through the magic of modern science, had discovered a hereditary gene for something. And they made a big deal about it, said, wow, we found the gene, we've located the particular gene for such and such a thing, etc., etc. And my dad just leans over to me and goes, look at these fellas. They found bloodline. And in that one moment, it was like, what our way of seeing the world is that we talk about the spiritual predisposition of one particular trait to be passed on hereditary, and we call it bloodline. If you are an orator in your community, that's because you got a bloodline for it. If you are someone for whom people keep gifting you things, it's because you got a bloodline for it. This probably goes back to somewhere along your line that's been a way, that's been a pattern that's occurred in your life. And so, who knows, 500 years ago, you would have been a bloodline of, oh, they're the lucky people. You want them in your village because people give them stuff, Oh, we never go hungry in winter because things come to us. So our traditional way, our religious way, our spiritual way is to name it as bloodline, and yet Western science has found it as a genetic code that's been passed on hereditary. It was just a moment of the clash of worlds of knowing. Yeah.
Here's something for you. Think of it like education in the ways of culture, the oldest culture that lives. And curiosity doesn't really justify all the questions that you can ask.
Is it ever okay to ask someone how Aboriginal they are? Oh my God.
I get this all the time.
Short answer means no.
Can I just answer it flatly, straight? No, it's never okay to ask somebody how Aboriginal they are. It's very offensive to ask that question.
If you look at our history, there's a reason why people aren't 100% Aboriginal, and that's really heartbreaking.
It doesn't matter what colour of skin or anything like that. That's another stereotype. You have to be black to be dark to be Aboriginal. Yeah. And people don't realise that we lose our skin colours in each generation and things like that. So that's probably one of the ones we cop all the time. How black are you?
You don't ask somebody how much Anglo-Saxon they are or how much Irish or how much Welsh. It doesn't even come into consideration.
I think there's a lot of people at the university who've asked me that, and I think they just think it's okay because it's a matter of curiosity.
Absolutely a matter, and I understand that as well. But to answer this question, no.
I think it opens up to you having to justify yourself and justify how much you are or how much you feel. It's just kind of taking away from who you really are and your identity. So
definitely.
If somebody said to you, I'm of Aboriginal heritage, pretty much it should be expected that you just accept that statement.
It's like the coffee, you have your long blacks, you have your flat whites, whatever. It's put as much milk in as you want, but it's still that coffee.
But with so much history and tradition and love, I wanted to talk about religion. So
my belief is that we do have a spiritual dimension to the way we are in the world. And I don't want to get too hung up on, we need to bag and tag that as a religious phenomenon, but religion does form a way to engage with that. But for First Nations here, the way that comes to life is in our relationship with the earth and the elements and the world around us, that we sit in relationship to it. So when we pass a tree that has been clearly standing there for more than my lifetime, that's worth acknowledging. It doesn't mean that it is where I bow and pay homage to, but I will acknowledge that big tree because it has stood there longer than even we built roads. It probably was there before the tall ships arrived. That kind of reverence for the nature itself forms a relationship. Now, there'll be First Nations people who can tell you with precision the map of their country because they're intimately connected to it. From a child, they have walked it and had it taught to them, instructed on where to go, what relationship they have, it has become their entire lives consciousness of connection. But then you'll have other people who go, my traditional lands are somewhere and I don't really have a relationship to it. But when I see stuff happen in nature, I kind of feel like that was meant for me to see that. If that bird flies across in front of me, if the branch falls from the tree and hits the path in front of me, I intuit that as being significant. And then you know, you're having a cafe conversation, and then your fellow Melburnian or Sydneyite or Bris Vegas resident goes, have you ever had that feeling where you think about someone and they call you? And then from a First Nation spirit point of view, you go, yeah, that's that spirit reaching out to you. But yeah, I was just thinking about it. Isn't it weird? I was thinking about them, and then they rang me on the mobile. That notion that we can somehow feel something, we can argue it away. Western philosophy has been great at being able to do that, and you know, they're trying to find their way of reasoning the world. That's okay, but they'll say that's random act. It is mildly coincidental. Whereas spiritual mob will say, nah, that's that spirit of that person was already traveling to you.
When we come back, how to love all our people, even if they do dumb shit, like wear the flag like a cape and think that Australia is a young country.
The main objective of this audio project is to bring together entrepreneurs and creatives who share similar values so that they can find the courage to put out their authentic voice for the right people to hear, which allows for them to make their impact on the world. Every great movement started with a memorable speech. For access to full-length interviews, go to psychologyofentrepreneurship.com and click the button.
When we look around, it seems like all Australians are white Anglo-Saxon people. How do you support a team that represents your country when no one in the team looks like you?
One of the strengths that I see in the Intercultural Framework is it allows us to approach it from both sides, rather than seeing one side as deficit and the other side as honourable. We actually see both sides as carrying, we've all got our stuff that we've done good and done wrong. And how do we come together to do this work? Because for me, we can get programmed within our communities to not like those people. And they could manifest themselves, or we could clothe them in police uniforms or images of authority, or we could clothe them as people who have come illegally on boats or by plane, and they have come here and they don't belong here. Or we could do it to saying those people who put those flags and wear them like capes. And what we do is we program ourselves, and we then arrive in communities or comfort zones that all go, yeah, you're right, Mark. Yeah, you're right. Those people. And all of a sudden we're like, wow, how did I end up down this pathway of holding such a strong, tight view of negative typecast stereotype against those people? And for that to become challenged and for us to undo it, it's got to affect us emotionally. It's got to affect our because we tie it up with our identity. And the way you even just said it, then a previous, like the person I was previously may have reacted in a different way. I think what it means is that the kind of resilience we need is to keep going on that journey. There was a time when I couldn't enjoy seeing my fellow Australians do certain things. And I think there's a radio interview that I did where I told them about how I used to love the All Blacks and go for the All Blacks, and used to love seeing the All Blacks beat the Wallabies. But I realised how much I needed to change, because if I wanted Australians to fall in love with First Nations, I need to figure out what it takes to fall in love with Australians. And so my thing of saying, I'm going to go for the Wallabies, and now I'm the only Wallaby supporter in my household, but, whatever. And so now it's the shift that comes with that to say, these are my people. And when you stop paying attention to the barrier that says they are not my people, and you start consciously saying, these are my people, those ones who do wear that flag in that way, it's not what I would do, but they're my people. And I am in relationship to them. Now that's a huge thing to have to overcome, and it will bring out emotion, and it brings out doubt, and it brings out all sorts of things. But if we don't keep down this pathway, I think we're doomed if we just want to stay in our corner and say the rest of the world is rubbish.
Like I've said in previous volumes, I'm new Australian, like 12 years, but I'm Australian and I have a passport and everything. There is so much wisdom in the ages. That is why we study history, right, Mark?
No one raises their children and their generations. And I read this in from a Native American talking about how he lived through the lifetime where he grew up with the buffalo, and by the time he was an old man, there's no more buffalo. And the book outlines how his reflection on it, how no one raises their children to say, at any moment, all that we know is going to be annihilated. So prepare yourself for that psychological shock, but go on, have fun, it's cool. No, nobody does that purposefully, or no one gears that up. And yet we have seen that has happened around the world in the last couple of 100 years, that abrupt ending of everything that they knew has just fallen like a hammer on their ways of life all around. History is full of that. Yes, that's true. But here in this context, you've got 1,000 generations of practicing a particular way of being and having that completely dismantled in 2-3 generations. And then you've got the reality of, well, how do you rebuild from that? Okay, we'll go back to where we were, back to our homelands, and we'll practice what we did with our great-great-grandparents. No, you can't. We've built a city there now. It's a beautiful, awesome city, but that means that you cannot practice what you used to have here. In any culture where there's been the kind of removing of icons or sacred, whether it's temples or statues or places of worship or whatever it is, any removal of that still has people going, there was something there. There was a site, that was a site there. There was something that was used to be there, and we used to come here and worship here. So we've got a resilient psychology that still is bubbling along that says the city that we're on, the city we live in, the reality of the river reminds us that we have a relationship with the land that's underneath this. And even in a city like Brisbane, we can still drive to a couple of spots and go, see that markings on the rocks there? See that mound that's in the ground there? That's evidence of us still being here, that we were here before the 1800s, and we are still here now.
But Mark, what if I find it difficult to connect with that?
We find it difficult to connect, but that doesn't mean we need to say that it doesn't exist. In the same way that I can honour and appreciate a Western philosophical way of rationalizing data and things that happen, I would hope that they would be able to be free enough for me to rationalize things that happen with a spiritual lens and see that deep connectivity to the land as well.
Because our culture is the oldest living one in the world. I mean, people don't understand how long we've been on this earth, how our stories were told in the past, what happened to us as well, our culture. We've got no language back home where I'm from. It's only 2 hours north from here and there's no language. And I know that myself and other people in the community are actually trying to bring that back and trying to bring our language back. Like, if you look at the language map, you've probably all seen that. You'll see that out of that, there's not many that's still active. I'm not sure if you guys speak traditional language up there or anything.
My mother's country is Palm Island, so that was one of the main settlements and everything where they sent everybody as punishment, you know, and yeah, since then culture has been lost.
I'm so inspired by the strength and resilience of such a people, and that's one thing I would love for all of Australia to be able to see, how incredible and rich this culture is.
The term Indigenous Australians is used to represent Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people of Australia, the traditional landowners of this country. Archaeological evidence confirms that they are the oldest continuous civilization on Earth, extending back over 65,000 years, being among the first humans to migrate out of Africa.
Okay, before we wrap this up, we know it is hard to get involved, especially if you don't really know what to say and how to approach the whole scenario. Luckily, that is exactly what Mark Yettica-Paulson specializes in.
If you can imagine the kind of classic setup of a like a dance hall where most of the people are kind of hugging the walls, you know? There's a handful of people who are, I don't know, maybe they're the nerdy people who don't care, but they're in the middle dancing. But the rest of us want to dance. We want to get in. We want to do something, but we're not cool enough, or we don't want to embarrass ourselves. We certainly don't want to ask that other one on the other side of the room, although I've been wanting to ask them out for ages. We don't want to do it. So we will stay glued to the wall or talking to our friends and not go to the middle. You see where I'm going with this? So the same amount of internal fortitude that's needed to overcome the shame, to pass through that barrier, to cross the floor and say, hey, would you like to dance? And then the cascading possibilities of others going, oh, wow, I'm glad he did that. I'm glad she did that. Maybe I could do that then. What we've got to do is we've got to figure out what is it that's holding us back. What is it that's limiting us from crossing the floor and from learning about the others? And it doesn't help us if we have the ability of social media to say that everything we do is wrong, even when we don't use it, it's wrong. You know, Mark, you haven't put anything on Facebook in like 2 years. Sorry. And then when I do put something, then it's like, what'd you put that up there for? Oh, man, I'm so sorry again. It's like, for me, we've got to cross the floor. We have to figure out what is it that's holding me back from saying there is someone across there that I would like to engage with, I would like to form a relationship with, I'd like to get to know. And I'm going to have a go at it. And then when everyone's shouting at you, don't do it, it's a mistake, the world will fall in, the economy will break, we won't have jobs anymore, there'll be all kinds of bad things that'll happen as a consequence. They'll be like, okay, I'll just test it out then and see what happens. So the spectator part of it goes back to the proximity and legitimacy, and also comes with that barrier stuff that holds us back. I think that we need to see ourselves as people who can break through. I also believe we need to see ourselves as the kind of animated spectators. If we are people who will watch the arena in the middle. We have to be ones who are like, yes, I'm supporting you. Go for it. Get in there, do that. As opposed to the spectators who are like, oh man, this is going to go bad. If you've ever been to a footy match where the supporters kind of lose interest in their team, what we've seen the Lions go from hardly anyone in the stadium to heaps of people now, But that kind of role of spectator, we have to pass through the barrier to say, I will cross the floor or I will be animated to show that I support this. So I think that's what we've got to break through. And my challenge to my fellow white Australians is to take up an active role in something that would be multicultural. Because if you and I went to a multicultural event, they would ask you to bring some food that, comes from your tradition, and they'd ask me to bring something that comes from my tradition. Okay, I'd whip up something that would be sort of fusion, but would have kangaroo meat in it or something. I don't know, just was it lemon myrtle or something? Wow, it's just, But for our fellow white Australians, they've got to do more than just say, here's a meat pie that comes through my British heritage, or I'm not going to bring anything. I'm just going to watch while everyone else occupies a few moments on stage, sings and dances and does their stuff. I'm just going to watch. I really want to encourage my white Australian friends to find a way to get up on that stage as well and say, this is what I want to share. That's my identity, my belonging.
I never really thought of this. Why is it that ethnic groups that practice traditions are seen as a play that can be watched from afar, rather than, I love the traditions you practice, these are mine, let's exchange practices? For you listening, I hope this gives you an appreciation of my culture, of the land that I now call home, of the people that have belonged to this land for centuries and millennia. This is my home, and this is how my people are constantly fighting and are constantly on the edge.
You put a different lens on it in the way that people show up psychologically to a piece of collaboration or a piece of work that they've got to do together. And as human beings, we revert to our central kind of comfort zone where we feel competent and confident that we know what's going on, and we feel relaxed because all the stuff around us is known to us and it's good. We can also be a bit lazy in there as well and just kind of chill out and kind of lie on the couch, curl up, wrap a blanket around us and read a book because it's our comfort zone. But we feel well when we're in there. Now, psychologically, you push people further out of that and it manifests itself then. And so as they get to their learning edge, they go, oh, well, this is starting to hurt now. This is starting to get a bit testy. I'm not so sure now. And we resist feeling a lack of competence. We don't like feeling like we're out of control. We don't like feeling that there's no pathway in front of us. We don't like feeling like at any moment this whole thing could be annihilated. But if you look at 2020, globally, we're being put into that kind of space. Most of the human population is at the edge, and it's challenging. It's really tough for us. But for First Nations people, that dynamic of how do we find our comfort core, our comfort space, when so much of the built environment, beautiful, wonderful country, Australia, but it puts us on it puts us on the edge because of this lack of, oh yeah, that's right, you're the mob who was here before the rest of us got here. And we just need to find a way to have a better relationship in that way, rather than say, too bad, so sad, you got pushed out, we're the dominant ones now. We need a different way of framing our relationship, because none of us get to go and occupy that comfort zone unless we are in an act of denial. For First Nations, we're always on the edge. And it manifests itself in the kind of behaviour that means we're always pushing, always fighting.
Psychology of entrepreneurship.
Coming up on the psychology of entrepreneurship.
So my name is Klaus Marte. I'm the CEO and founder of Conbody, and I'm also executive director at Second Chance Studios.
Psychology of entrepreneurship.
And I did anything that I needed to do, whether it was negative or positive, mostly negative, selling drugs and even breaking into apartments. Now all the slaves are free. Who's picking up the cotton? The slave owner's not used to picking up their own cotton. They're not going to go out there and pay anybody to do it. So they created the 13th Amendment. The 13th Amendment states the only way you can become a slave is if you're incarcerated again.
Psychology of entrepreneurship.
I interviewed Mark because he is the founder and chief of Super Native Unlimited, specializing in creative and cultural leadership development. Mark Yettica-Paulson has worked with organizations such as National Australia Bank, the Australian Football League, Medibank Australia, Australia Post, and the Foundation for Young Australians. He was Joint Campaign Director for Recognise, the recent campaign for a national referendum to amend the Australian Constitution to acknowledge Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, and the removal of discrimination. Mark has developed the educational foundations for the Australians Together workshops and presentations while in his role as strategic business manager and key presenter. He is a TEDx speaker, a visionary, and a uniter of people.
Psychology of entrepreneurship.
This is a Must Amplify production. Special thanks to every guest expert that has appeared on the show. Editing, voiceovers, and sound design by Kaylee Bunnyman and Tiago Vega. Guest research and content by Claire Gould and Corinne Castles. Project managed by Kaylee Bunnyman. Produced and hosted by me, Ronsley Vaz. For more episodes and where to listen, go to mustamplify.com/POE.
Hey, it's Kaylee from Must Amplify. I'm the sound engineer for this volume of Psychology of Entrepreneurship. I'm part of the team that made this production come alive. I work as a part of a global team with our studios based in West End, Brisbane, Australia. If you would like a podcasting checklist, email me at kaylee@amplifyagency.media. That's KAILI@amplifyagency.media. We specialize in finding your voice and making sure it's heard by the right people. If you are considering whether a podcast is a good idea for your business, check out our other show on shouldistartapodcast.com.